Hi everyone, I'm J.F.Penn from thecreativepenn.com and today I'm here with Rebecca Cantrell. Hi Becky.
Hi, Joanna.
It's great to have you back on the show. Just a little introduction. Rebecca is a New York Times and USA Today best-selling and multi-award-winning thriller and mystery author. Her series include the Hannah Vogel historical thrillers set in 1930s Berlin, the Joe Tesla contemporary thrillers, the Order of the Sanguines supernatural thrillers with James Rollins, which I love, and the Malibu Mysteries with Sean Black. And today we're talking about how to write a mystery. Just checking, Becky, how many books have you written now?
17.
Ah, there we go.
My son made me count them up. Like, I don't know, 15 or so.
Yeah.
No, make a list.
Now, we both write thrillers and also mysteries. And I described your Hannah Vogel series there as thrillers, but then also mysteries. So what do you think is the difference between a mystery and a thriller, or can they be combined?
I think there is a lot of play in the differences. So I think the basic difference that most people would say when they talk about it is a mystery is about figuring out who solved a crime. So who was the killer, who committed a crime, and solving it and restoring justice to the world. Whereas a thriller is kind of more about suspense. So you know the Hitchcock saying about suspense, where he says if you have a bomb and it blows up, that's surprise. But if you have a bomb and you put it under a table and the audience sees the bomb, then they come in and you have people come in and they're walking around and they're talking, and then the audience is getting more and more uneasy because they know there's people who die at any moment. And he said, and that's suspense. And I think thrillers go more towards suspense, where you know something terrible is going to happen, you have some idea of what it is, and the story hinges on will that evil plot be stopped, and how will it be stopped. So it's more about discovery versus suspense, I think.
Yeah, and do you think there's often more of a pacing or a high stakes element in thriller? Because, you know, a mystery, like cozy mystery is a big subgenre, and it can be, you know, a very small town, small thing. Whereas thrillers, there's often a much bigger thing at stake. You know, with the Sanguines or with some of my supernatural thrillers, it really is, you know, ultimate evil going to destroy the world type of thing. So do you think that sort of stakes and also pacing would come into it as well?
I think that's true. I think the epic kind of stage of most thrillers. But then you can think of things like Misery, which is not a mystery, but it is a thriller, and that's really just the stake of that one guy's life and will he be killed by his number one fan. So kind of the Stephen King Misery book. So I think that you can make thrillers that are very personal, but most of them are more epic in scope. So if you look at the Sanguines, that spans 2,000 years and 5 continents, and you know.
Yeah. I mean, our supernatural thrillers, fit in that big thing, and also there's no mystery if you know the antagonist, right? So many thrillers, you actually know who the bad guy is, and you know who is committing the big crimes, and it's not a case of who it is; it's more about stopping them.
Yeah. Will the guy stop them, and will the main character find out who they even are? But I also think there's thrillers where that doesn't happen, you know, where I think in thrillers there's a little more leeway to let the bad guy win. So if you look at Silence of the Lambs, which is a thriller, in the end, Hannibal Lecter wins. He gets away. I mean, she also wins because she, you know, saves the girl who's been kidnapped, and she gets that serial killer, Buffalo Bill. But the other one, the bigger, more dangerous one, leaves. And I think thrillers have more of a license to do that. I think if you do that with mysteries, the readers will get angry.
Yes, you can't have the bad guy get away, really, at the end of a mystery, unless, I guess, it's a series. And we'll come back to series. But let's talk about the obligatory scenes, because, you know, if you want to write a mystery, there are things that readers expect. So, for example, the crime, usually a murder. Is it always a murder? There's a good question. Is it always a murder in a mystery?
I don't think it has to be. So if you look like the second Hannah Vogel mystery, she's kidnapped at the beginning and her child was taken away. And for the first half of the book, she's really just trying to get him back. And then there's a murder and she solves the murder and finds her son. But the first half, there isn't a body. So it doesn't have to have a body right away. But I think traditionally you're supposed to have a body by the end of the prologue or chapter 1. The body drops and you know what the stakes are and you know where it's going to go. I think that's the traditional mystery plot. And I think most mysteries do follow that. And then at the end, you're going to have the wrap up where you find out who the killer is, and then some sense that justice has been served. Either the killer will go to jail or the killer will be punished in some other way, so that the reader gets catharsis of knowing that the world is a just place and things have gone well.
Yeah, which is exactly what happens in the real world.
It's what you want to happen in the real world. I think that's something people get out of mysteries, that they read them because they want to see order restored. They want to see the bad guys lose and the good guys win, even in places where there are no murders. Like I think in Iceland, for example, I think there are almost no murders. But if you look at Iceland noir, people are dropping like flies. So there's obviously, realistic, there's some kind of catharsis that they're getting out of it.
Yeah, no, that's right. Okay, so we've got the body at the beginning and, of course, the roundup at the end, but then some of the other obligatory scenes. So the clues and the red herrings, there have to be, and also the number of suspects. I think that was something when I wrote my mystery series, I realised that with my thrillers, there's often just one massive antagonist who has an all-powerful organisation that they have to destroy. But with mystery, you have to have multiple possible antagonists, don't you? So multiple suspects, and those clues and red herrings. Would that be right?
I would say so. Yeah, I would say usually. I'm like 97% of the time. But yes, I would say usually you want to have multiple antagonists and multiple ideas of who the villain is, and it can't be the obvious one. So if you have someone who seems like the obvious killer throughout most mystery books, that person is not, in fact, going to be the killer. So you hope, as a reader, that you can keep, or as a writer, that you can keep the readers guessing till the end, and that they won't figure out who the killer is until you want to reveal it, or shortly before you want to reveal it. That's cool.
Yeah, but also, doesn't the real killer have to appear in the first, let's say, quarter to a third of, I think that it should appear at the beginning. You can't just suddenly bring in the killer at the end. So you have to at least have them appear, but you have to misdirect the reader so they don't suspect that person.
Well, there's a rule that says you're supposed to have met the killer by the end of Act 1. So that would be, a quarter of the way through the book. You either have to have met them or they have to have been referred to. So then you have to, as a writer, you have to figure out how to misdirect people away from that person, or make that person seem like they have an airtight alibi, or they don't seem to be that interested, or for whatever reason. You have to kind of push back.
And for that reason, I think that mysteries need a larger cast, because you have to have enough characters that you misdirect to at least, let's say, 3. You can't just have one other misdirection. You kind of need 3. So how do you, when you're planning yours, how do you come up with a cast that, will make that possible?
Well, I usually start with the murder victim. So you have someone who's been killed, and then you have to figure out who would kill them. So often, for some of my mysteries, I will write down what actually happened. So I think there's the story of what actually happened, what the reader thinks, and what the reader thinks happened. So I often actually write, in very truncated form, I write down, okay, this is what happened, da 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 da, and then I know that I'm never breaking the rule of what actually happened, and then I look at the murder victim, and you have to figure out who else would have killed them and why. And that goes back to their character, who would want to murder them. And so you need someone who has enemies, or who is in the way of a certain number of people. And so for me, it's about plotting, although I know writers who do not plot and write mysteries, and they have no idea who the killer is, and they write beginning to end and then do a second draft where they choose nothing. Like Kelly Stanley, for instance. She writes The City of Dragons and the Miranda Corby series. She writes her whole first draft and then does minor edits, and she's done, and she really doesn't know. And they're brilliant books. It's quite frustrating for those of us who write a million drafts, but some people can pull that off.
Yeah, well, I think that is one of the questions, because I did find that with my London I call them London crime thrillers, but they're mysteries. You know, there is a detective, and it's very difficult to put these things in genre sometimes. But I did find that I had to do quite a lot more plotting than I would do on a thriller, in terms of, oh right, I need the misdirection here. I need to put a clue here to sort of point them to those people. So have you found that? I mean, obviously there are some people, as you mentioned, who don't plot, but is your plotting a lot heavier for mystery than some of your other books?
I would say no. I would say
You're a plotter.
I'm a plotter. Although the book with Rollins, we didn't actually plot nearly as much as my regular books. So he's like, oh, we'll totally plot this. And then we were really just plotting a few scenes in advance. I mean, we knew what the tent poles were, we knew what we were shooting for, but the details were worked out as in the writing. But he is like a plot machine. I mean, I would be, we'd be writing on, I'd be like, I think we need more here. And then, we need 50 pages because this has to happen and there's this much stuff. And he'd be like, okay. And then he would just sit there and you could see him load the whole plot into his head, which takes him about 10 seconds. And then he would just like come up with all this stuff that fit in for that. And I do not have that plotting gene. It takes me a lot longer to figure out what might happen and to go over stuff.
But I guess, actually, I mean, having read some of your books, your single author books are probably more character focused than plot. As in James Rollins being one of my favourite authors, in your books, I think that certainly Hannah's, are very character centric. So what makes a good main character, especially if you're planning a mystery series?
Well, for Hannah, let me just say, honestly, I didn't expect the books to be a series. So I wrote the first book, and then I sold it to Tor Forge, and they said, we'll only buy it if it's a series. What's the second book? And then I had to come up with the whole second book plot by Monday. And I'm like, of course there's a series. And I'm like, okay, honey, you're in charge of the baby. I'm out. And then I spent the whole weekend trying to figure out what she could do next and what the rest of the books could be like. So with that in mind, know that I didn't actually design it going in. But I think that you need, for a good main character in a series to work, I think you need a character that people are fascinated by and want to spend time with. So usually that's someone who's likable, someone who's complex, someone who's flawed, and someone who's intriguing. So, for example, somebody like Hannibal Lecter or Dexter, those are very flawed characters that you wouldn't like in real life and you wouldn't want to spend time with in real life, but they're fascinating in fiction. And so they pull you, or Lestat, they pull you forward just by the force of their personality and you want to know about them. So I think they have to be someone that you want to know more about, someone you want to go on a journey with. And I know when I've read books, and if there's nobody I can hang on to and usually like, then I can't get engaged with the book. And I know there are people who love books that have unlikable protagonists or unlikable, a whole set of unlikable characters, but I have real trouble with that. Like when I read Gone Girl, for instance, which is wonderful, it's very well put together, I couldn't stand anybody in the book. So I was kind of annoyed. Like I read through it and it was well done, but I just didn't like anyone. And that's the point of it. They did what they were trying to do. But ordinarily for books like that, I just get, after 50 pages or something, I just get bored.
So I think, what we're saying there is the sort of make them, even if not likable, somebody you want to spend time with across multiple books. So, and understandable in some way and complex in some way. So my main character, Jamie Brooke, Jamie being a woman in this, has a terminally ill daughter, and she's a policewoman in London, but she dances tango to escape from her life at night. So she kind of becomes this different person. And I mean, that was really fun to research, tango dancing. And I read this book at the time and I was like, wow, that's really cool. I'm going to have my character dance tango at night. And
do you do tango?
I've tried, but I'm a bit like 2 left feet. I like the idea of being an amazing tango dancer, but not like the 20 years of work that goes into it. But I think that complexity, I think, would be another thing, is like bringing a level of complexity to your character. So, and trying to step away from the cliche. So I think you do have to have some kind of wound, like as in they are a wounded hero in some way, but not just like that they're the hard drinking divorced male cop with a paunch.
Yeah, who likes jazz. I mean, who is basically, Raymond Chandler's character.
Oh, but there we go. And that became a bit of a trope. So what's different about Hannah in your books?
Well, she's not a guy. She's a crime reporter, so she's not actually an investigator, but she has connections into that world. So she knows criminals. She's reported on criminals. She's been to the jail. She has a lot of contacts and informants in the underworld that will serve her well during the books. But it's also the time period. So for Hannah, I think Berlin is as much a character as Hannah, and I think the 1930s is as much a character as Hannah. So the time and the place are very specific, and I try to make them very rich because those are what bring it alive. So it's not just, for me, place is very important. So if you look at any of my books, there's something about that place that intrigues me. So writing something that was very generic and set in a suburb with no name wouldn't really interest me as much as a specific place. So for Hannah, it's 1931 Berlin. She's poor, she's an underdog, she's a writer, but she has some tools. She's smart, she has friends in the underworld, she's got, the ability to move around, she's beautiful, which she doesn't like, but it's useful for her. So there's a lot of different aspects to her.
I think that's a good point. So they don't have to be a cop or an investigator as such, but they do need these tools. They need some way to be able to find out information if they're not in the police. So they need the contact. So yeah, by book 3, my character Jamie is out of the police and is now a private investigator, but she has those contacts back in the police. So you do need to kind of set those up, don't you? Because they can't... Well, I guess there's the amateur sleuth mystery, which often happens in cozies, doesn't it?
But those, I think, have a very different level of suspension of disbelief. So, cozies, you can have a cat who solves a mystery, or, you can have a cat narrator who has a rich interior life. And those are things that you couldn't get away with in a more hard-boiled novel or a thriller. It's a different promise. I mean, I don't remember who said it, but a novel is a promise that you have for the reader, and I think you have to know what that promise is. So in a cozy, like the Sofia Salgado books that I write with Sean Black are just comedy cozies, just utterly ridiculous, silly, funny stuff happening, all like the Janet Ivanovich books. And so you set up that's the promise. Whereas the Hannah books are set in Berlin in the 1930s. They're meticulously researched. I spent a lot of time making sure that every single detail was right. They're in the Holocaust Memorial Museum collection. They're serious books. And that's the promise. The promise when you see it is, that's who Hannah is, that's what she's doing, and then you know who Sophia is. And different readers want different experiences, or, the same reader wants a different experience at different times.
Absolutely. And then setting, because that's really important too. You and I both do this, and we've bonded over the Prague Golem and various settings that we've both used in different books. We've used similar settings, but my books are all around London, and everything is about London. So it is. Has to be true to that and has to be exact. So that's another question, like where does the truth end and the fiction begin? Is it literally just the character and the situation? Is every single other thing correct? How far do you know what I mean? Like, where does that fiction start?
I would say for the Hannah Vogel books, I tried to make every single detail that could be real. Mm-hmm. So when she talks about a brand of cigarettes that really existed, it was called that. I got a set of newspapers from the 1931 that had all these ads in it. And so I was able to have that to draw on, to be very specific. So I would say every single thing that can be real is real. The subway stations are all correct. The street names are correct. The buildings where I mentioned a specific building, that building existed and it did look like that. But obviously Hannah didn't exist. However, some of the events that happened around her, she was there for Kristallnacht. That really happened. She was there for the Night of the Long Knives Purge. That really happened. And there's a lot of, in 1930s Germany, obviously, there's a lot of material that covered what was there. And there's a lot of diaries and newspapers and primary sources. And so I leaned on this pretty heavily. And then anywhere where I did diverge from reality. I mention that in my author's notes.
Yeah, and I do author's notes as well, and I like that because you can, and what I love is when people email me and say, hey, I've just been Googling like the places in your books, like my book One Day in Budapest, people actually go and sort of go around the different places in Budapest, and I'm like, yeah, what I wrote didn't actually happen, but that is the place, kind of thing.
Yeah.
which is really cool. Okay. So let's talk about bad guys or antagonists, because, I mean, clearly you've got the Nazis, which, let's face it, are, easy. Yeah, easy to pick. But I guess the main question there is, how do we make the bad guys not just cardboard cutout Nazi bad guys, for example?
Well, I think the bad guys are a character in your story, like the good guys or any other character. And because they're a character, to me, they're human. So they have all of the flaws that real humans have, and they have all of the advantages and disadvantages that real humans have. So in the Hannah Vogel books, the Anstrom is one of the Nazi bad guys, and he was a tremendously bad guy. But like, he was a very good friend of Hitler. He's one of Hitler's best friends, and Hitler had him executed in 1934, and like had nightmares about it for the rest of his life. So this was a man who, helped bring Hitler to power, but he was also gay and out, and he wasn't particularly anti-Semitic. So the other Nazis were constantly like harassing him because he wasn't particularly anti-Semitic, and he's like, I don't really care whatever you do with that is fine. I kind of want to make Germany great again, was his kind of slogan. And so he was about, building the army up, taking back the countries that they'd lost, and then taking more countries that he felt should have belonged to Germany all this time to begin with. But he had an other life. He had all these other things that he did. He had friends, he had hobbies, he had flaws. He was adored by his men. He was very organized. He, won a bunch of medals in World War I. He wrote a very bombastic memoir that was, required reading, and then the Nazis destroyed it after the purge. But he was a person, and I think you need to remember that every villain is a person, and they say every villain is a hero in his own story. So you have to figure out what their story is that's making them act the way they do.
Yeah.
So you have some pretty bad guys in your stuff. How do you make them so complex?
Yeah, I think I was thinking about that. I mean, for me, it's often a lot about their belief system as well, and and obviously it's very hard to say too much without giving too much away with the books. But I've got some quite political angles on my books too, around the sort of political elite in London with money who think they can do whatever they like, versus the misfits and the outcasts and the people who get scorned but are actually good people and want to help the community. And so which in London is a huge pressure, between the super rich and the, kind of normal people getting pushed out of places where they've lived for generations. And so it's, I think, thinking about, and then you think, okay, but then if you take the point of view of that political elite, which is, without seeing it in a negative way. So, we want to make the city even better. We want to clean up the streets, and, you can see that these things become important to those characters. So I think it's that empathy, which is so important for being a writer, is trying to put yourself in that point of view. Like, I want the best for my children is a very common, it's a common human feeling, and a super rich person feels that and does different things to, can do different things to other people. So that, I think that's really important. And also, just humanizing them in a different way and giving them some kind of good scene. I mean, it's called the save the cat moment in, screenwriting, but I like House of Cards, which, do you watch House of Cards?
I watched the first season.
Yeah.
But it's one of those where I can't get along with it. Everybody is so unsympathetic. It's tough for me.
Oh, well, that's funny, because what I enjoyed about the very first episode of House of Cards is he actually kills a dog, and it was a nod It was a nod to save the cat. So yeah. So and if you're into screenwriting, you're like, oh, and I was just like pointing at the screen, going, oh, that's so clever. And you know, he and I'm like, yeah, because they did that to demonstrate his character. So actually, let's talk about that, because I think foreshadowing is tremendously important for mystery, but also depth in a novel and layering of meaning and that kind of thing. So how would you define foreshadowing, and maybe, you know, give some examples?
Well, I would say, well, foreshadowing, that in House of Cards is a good example of that. So when you're setting up something that the character will do later, so you can see that they have the potential in them to act in this way. And it's, you know, a smaller degree. So now it's a dog, then it's the president. But it's the idea that, you know, this is a person who's capable of evil. And it might be something as simple as, you know, killing a fly. It doesn't even have to be a dog. Or it can be something they see, or a metaphor of, you know, of what they're looking at. So when I write books, sometimes I will make a list of, this is going to sound dorky, but I'll make a list of like images and words and concepts that I want to put in there. So when I did the Sanguine books with Jim, we were really conscious that we wanted these to be kind of gothic thrillers. So, you know, I made a list of all the color palettes that the characters could use that were the ancient characters. So they, you know, they had, you know, the ochres and the golds and the silvers and the blacks and the colors that you would have had that were mineral-based paint colors. And I know nobody ever noticed this but me. And then the newer characters could have different colors and different things that they noticed. And even if the reader isn't aware of that, I think it does seep in. And so for like the Hannah books, in the first book I had scenes with her brother, and he was dead and he was talking from beyond the grave. And it just confused people completely. And my agent said, I'll represent you if you take that out. I was like, okay. And I'd heard a lot of complaints from my beta readers as well, so I realized I wasn't getting it right. So I took him out. But in the original version, every time that he was going to come in, she touched this handkerchief that he'd given her. It was this red silk handkerchief. And I left that in. Even though it didn't link to anything anymore, it was still a reminder of him. And I've gotten emails from people who have said, I like how that makes her seem close to him. So even though I'd taken out all the pieces that should have connected to it, they still responded to that action. They still knew. They got the depth of that. So.
No, that's really great. And I mean, obviously,
it's very smart.
Well, and that's the thing, you know, we'll come back to readers being very smart, but you know, that foreshadowing I think is so important. It can be really obvious, like the gun on the shelf has to go off by, you know, Act 3 or whatever that quote is, Chekhov's gun. But you know, I have in Desecration, the murder scene, the actual body is found in an anatomy museum. So you know, the body is surrounded by body parts in jars, and that actually foreshadows the whole book, because the theme of the book is about anatomy and the meaning of the physical body and after death and that kind of thing. And it's, you know, quite a deep and meaningful undercurrent, but I don't say it in the book. I don't say the meaning of this book is, you know, you kind of, you know, you can do that with foreshadowing. And so the body parts in jars at the beginning, it's like, well, what will happen by the end with these kind of body parts? And there was one adaptation of And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie, you know, on BBC recently. And it's been ages since I've read the book, so I don't know if it's in the book. But at the beginning, in the very first scene, they're on a train, and the pull blind on the train carriage is a little noose. And it was brilliant. And if people haven't read And Then There Were None, you know, I won't say what it is, but I was like, oh, that's brilliant. And this was a fleeting camera glance over the window of the train, and there was a clear noose pull, you know, like you would pull down the thing to hide the light from the window. And I was like, that's brilliant. That's foreshadowing incredibly well, and probably most people never saw it, but it puts something into the reader's mind that we recognize these symbols, and it adds a layer to the experience, even if we're not aware of it.
In the movie Get Out, I don't know if you saw that, but the horror movie Get Out, at the beginning, it's a wonderful movie. You should see it, especially as a writer, because the way they set things up and pay things off, you're just in awe. By the time you get to the beginning at the end of the movie and you see where everything has fallen in, you're just like, oh my God, I have to rent that and watch it and take notes, because it's that well put together. But at the beginning, there's a scene where they're driving in the car, and it's a happy scene. He's going to meet her parents, and they love each other. It's happy, happy, happy. But as they're driving, there's this scene of the trees going by outside, And I don't know I don't know if it was the filter or the speed of the camera or whatever, but it was completely like 1970s horror trees. And so as you're watching it, you get very, very uneasy. And yet there's no specific thing you can point to that tells you why you're uncomfortable going along this sunny road, but you very much are. And I think movies get to cheat a little bit because they control your eye and you can't go back. Whereas if you're writing a book and you say, it looked like a noose, then you've kind of hung a candle on it, right? You really pointed there in the text in a way that if they just see it flash by in a film, you can get away with it more.
That's a really good point. And like I said, I can't remember the text, but that type of thing, I think your thing with the color palette, I do that too. And we are both super geeks, as you said. I mean, we love all this stuff. Super geeky. But that's also part of the fun, I think, of the mystery and the fun of writing. And what we should stress, if people are newer writers, is that you can go back and add this stuff in a second draft. And in fact, you probably will. I think foreshadowing is one of those things that you often do think about later. You get to a point and then you're like, oh, this would work even better if I went back to that chapter and I added in a little comment about something because it has to be there for that to happen. Do you find yourself adding that stuff in a second draft?
I do. Yeah, my son is a novelist, and he's 16, and he was struggling with his first book when he was writing it. And I was like, just write to the end, and you can come back because you are the writer god, and you control all space, all time, and everything that moves. So you don't have to get it right the first time. So you don't need to feel the burden of that. You can write your first draft. It can have all of these flaws and all of these things that are missing, and you can come back and fix them because nobody knows that it took you 10 drafts to get that perfect structure. And so you control time and space. You are the puppet master.
Okay, you're such a cool mom. No, but I do want to ask you about this because I get emails a lot from young people and also from parents of young people who are clearly, I know this is not about the mystery, but just one question about kids or young people. He's a young person. How are you encouraging him, or how would you tell other people listening to encourage their children to write? Because the one thing we hear is, don't do that. You're wasting your time. You'll never be able to make a living that way. Concentrate on your maths.
Well, I do say you need to it's good to study and get good grades and figure out what you want to do, and it doesn't have to be about writing. But I mean, I think the thing is, what's the point of concentrating on your maths if you get a job that you hate? And then suddenly 20 years later, you quit that job and you've been miserable for 20 years, and then you go become a writer.
That'd be me. That'd be me.
I mean, so what have you gained by telling your child to train for a job that they don't like? And I think the thing about writing that I'm constantly telling him over and over and over again is to really enjoy it, because I think there's so much myth out there of the damaged writer and the alcoholic writer and the drug addicted writer and the suffering writer. And you don't have to buy into that mythology. I mean, I am not a drinker or a drug user or any of those things. I'm happy, and I really love writing. Like, I love sitting down on a page and making magical things happen that come out of my head. And I think you need to tell children that this should be fun, and you need to read a lot, of course, but you should enjoy it. And there's no guarantees. I mean, I have a couple of friends who have PhDs in science, and they've been published, and they've worked, and they're struggling to find jobs. And so he's like, should I be a scientist like you? And they're like, no, be a writer like your mom. There's no job security anywhere. Have fun. And I think there's something to that.
No, that's awesome. And also with your own career, so you're a hybrid author. You have traditional deals and you self-publish as well. So is that something that you're passing on, the sort of business side and how you can make these multiple streams of income?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I've talked to him a lot about rights and control and being very careful. I mean, because I started out when you kind of signed away all your rights for life plus 75 years, and then they were gone forever. And so you only want to do that if the conditions of the deal are very, very good and you feel like that will benefit you. So I have friends who signed on, deals for books that are ebook only, and they haven't sold a lot of copies and they have no rights. So it's like, okay, so you've written the book, you've done the work, you've made a small sum of money, and then your chance is lost for that book. At the thing you can do. And so I'm probably, after having watched me go through traditional publishing, I think he's much more interested in self-publishing than going through that route, just because it's a lot of, writing is a lot of uncertainty anyway, and so many things are out of your control anyway, that, you want to think twice before you give up the stuff that you have. And plus you love the characters. So when I wrote the Hannah Vogel books, they were all traditionally published, and I just recently got the rights back. And it was transformative. I was so excited to have those books back, to be able to write in that world again, to be able to, go back and see Hannah. It's like I left Lars bleeding in the back of a truck 5 years ago. That poor man has been bleeding in the back of a truck for 5 years. And I've been getting very angry emails that are getting more and more angry as time goes on from readers saying, when are you going to tell us whether he lives or dies? And now I finally can, and I'm just so excited.
Oh, that's awesome. So are you now writing again in that series, are you?
I am. Yeah, I wrote a short story set in there that was from the point of view of her brother, so it was a prequel to book one. And then I'm going to be writing the next book in the series, which will hopefully come out next year. And so I get to go back to that world, and I've just missed it so much. So.
Oh, that's awesome. Okay, so we're almost out of time. So we're in this box set that's out, a mystery box set, and in that box set is Desecration by J.F.Penn.
And Traces Wolf by Rebecca Cantrell, and 8 books in total and 2 anthologies.
Yeah, it's a super mystery bundle. So you can get that bundle, and if you're watching the video, I'll include the link below, or you can go to thecreativepenn.com/mystery bundle, or just go to storybundle.com and it will be there. And of course, if it's gone by the time you listen to this interview, you can get our books all the usual places that books are sold, or on jfpenn.com and
RebeccaCantrell.com.
There we go, where you can find all of our books. So I guess, is there anything else that we think, coming back to the mystery thing, is there anything else that people who are writing mysteries should remember? I mean, are there books that they should read? That's probably the next one. Yeah, they're books that they should read that will help them write a mystery. Any good resources that you've found yourself?
I would say the best writing book I've read is called Screenwriting Tips for Authors by Alexandra Sokoloff, which is really fantastic because a lot of books tell you about Act 1 and Act 3, and then Act 2 is most of the book, and they don't tell you anything, where she really goes into the details of it. And another thing she does is she's like, make a list of 10 movies that you love, make a list of 10 main characters that you love, and it comes from a place of what do you love, what excites you, and you kind of move forward from there. So I think she gives you a lot of structure and a lot of passion, and it's very well put together. It's a very good analysis. I like Save the Cat by Blake Snyder. It's a nice, quick overview of the beats that are in movies. It's formulaic, but I think it's manageable for newer writers to say, okay, here's the 15 beats that you need. Here they are on one page. And then you can just be like, I can do that. I can write a one-page outline. And then you can kind of go from there. Because I think it's so easy to get overwhelmed in writing. And so if you have tools that move you forward, that's a good thing. But I also would say that your process is your process. And if the tools are slowing you down or stopping you or blocking you, then those aren't your tools, and you should try to find other tools that work for you.
Yeah, exactly. As always, there are no rules. There are some guidelines around mystery, but certainly there are no rules. Okay, so tell us again, where can people find you and your books online?
They're at Amazon, Kobo, Barnes & Noble, but www.rebeccacantrell.com. And there's a list of all of my books there and links to everything, and excerpts and reviews and things like that.
Fantastic. Thanks so much for your time, Becky. That was great.
Thank you. Have a good one.